to 150 degrees east, and in this video we're going to look at the Sino-French War from 1883 to 1885. The Sino-French War of the 1880s was over influence in Vietnam and access to overland trade routes into China. Now, I must point out that the map here, the borders that you see on the map here are the modern borders. The ancient borders did move around a little bit, but it gives you an indication of the dynasties and countries. Now, the French had shown interest in Vietnam since the late 18th century, and had even helped bring in the young dynasty by offering to exchange maritime security for control over trade. Gradually, the French presence increased, with colonies being set up from 1858, leading to France annexing several southern provinces in 1862 to form the colony of Cochin China. French explorers pushed northward and followed the Red River through Hanoi all the way to its source in Yunnan in China, suggesting a potential new trade route into China that bypassed the coastal ports that were controlled by treaties with other nations. The only problem was that there was a private army at the Chinese border on the Red River that charged large trade levies. Well, in 1873, an unauthorized attempt was made to impose French will on North Vietnam by force, but it was defeated, and later the French government disavowed the expedition. Nevertheless, in 1881, the local French commanders made another military attempt to exert control over Hanoi and protect French traders, so Hanoi being on the Red River as well. The military force later withdrew, but now both North Vietnam and China were alert to the bellicose French. Vietnam requested help from China, and the Qing dynasty sent the aforementioned private army to provide security in North Vietnam, which is known as Tonkin, and China also sent regular troops to control the region between the Red River and the Chinese border. Well, the French were not to be deterred, and on the 18th of August 1883, the French attacked the forts that guarded the approaches to the Vietnamese capital in Hue in the Battle of Thuan An. The French force was made up of 7 ships, 2 ironclads, 1 cruiser, 2 gunboats, a transport and a troop ship. With Bayard as the flagship, it was an ironclad barbette ship of 6,000 tons, 81 metres long, could do 14 knots, had 2 240mm main batteries, so roughly 10-inch there, and 250 millimeters of armour. You can see it on the screen. And it was supported by the ironclad Allant, 4,000 tons with 694mm main guns, so near enough to 8 inches. The cruiser Chateau Renaud, and the gunboats Lynx and Viper. They opened fire on the forts in the evening and continued the bombardment the next day before landing 1,000 men on the 20th of August and capturing the forts. This exposed Hue to attack, so the Vietnamese accepted a French protectorate over both Annan, which was what the central part of Vietnam was called, and Tonkin in North Vietnam on the 25th of August 1883 in the Treaty of Hue, and so that added French control to their colony in Cochin China. Well, next France turned to clearing out the Chinese troops and paramilitary forces from Tonkin. When China refused and war seemed likely, the French persuaded the German government to delay the release of the battleships Dingyuan and Zhenyuan, which were being built in Germany, until after the war. France subsequently won a series of land battles in 1883 and 1884, leading to China coming to terms with the Tientsin Accord. However, when China refused stalled on implementing the accord, the French naval commander, Courbet, was ordered to take his squadron to Futsu, where Foochow Naval Dockyard is, and prepare to attack the Chinese Fujian fleet in the harbour. Now, if you recall from the Qing Dynasty Navy video, the Qing Dynasty ran 4 fleets. The first, the Beiyang fleet that guarded the approaches to Beijing. Then the Nanyang Fleet, which was based at Shanghai, defending the southern seas, what was referred to as the southern seas. And then there was the Fujian Fleet based at Futsu, where the Fujian Navy yards are, and it was responsible for looking over securing Taiwan, the areas and the waters around there. And lastly, the Guangdong Fleet, basically around where Hong Kong is. It was the smallest of the fleets, and really it was only a constabulary force. It really didn't have any ability to conduct naval warfare, so not overly relevant to the Sino-French War. Well, as a show of force and to add weight to the French position, Rear Admiral Sébastien Lespée destroyed 3 Chinese shore batteries in the port of Keelung in northern Formosa, or Taiwan. And he did that by naval bombardment on the 5th of August 1884. Well, that didn't work out so well because negotiations between France and China broke down in mid-August, and so on the 22nd of August, Courbet was ordered to attack the French fleet at Futsu, the Fujian fleet at Futsu. Well, in a 2-hour engagement watched by neutral British and American vessels, Courbet's Far East Squadron annihilated the Chinese outclassed Fujian fleet and severely damaged the Fuzhou Navy Yard, which ironically had been built under the direction of the French administrator. See my video on the Qing Dynasty Navy for more details. 9 Chinese ships were sunk in less than an hour, including the 1,400-ton wooden corvette Yangvu, the flagship of the Fujian fleet, and many of the 500-ton gunboats that were in the fleet. Now, given Courbet's flagship was a 6,000-ton ironclad with armour, it was not surprising that it was such a one-sided affair. Chinese losses may have amounted to 3,000 dead, while French losses were minimal. Well, on the 1st of October 1884, the French landed at Keelung in Formosa with a force of 1,800 Marine infantry, forcing the Chinese to withdraw to strong defensive positions which had been prepared in the surrounding hills. Toward the end of 1884, the French were able to enforce a limited blockade of the Formosan ports. The blockade succeeded in part because the northern Beiyang fleet was not willing to support the Nanyang fleet, partly reflecting the rival internal politics within the Qing dynasty. But also remember, at this time the Beiyang fleet only had 2 1,300-ton steel cruisers. The ironclad battleships on order being held in their shipyards in Germany at France requests, and the other cruisers, the 3 German cruisers and the 2 UK cruisers, not even ordered yet. Nevertheless, the Nanyang fleet made an attempt to break the French blockade of Formosa early in the spring of 1885, committing the composite cruiser Kaijai and the unprotected cruisers Nanchen and Nanrui, 3 of the most modern ships in the Chinese fleet at the time, but only around a third of the size of the leading French warships and without armour. The Nanyang fleet also included the wooden steam frigate Yuyan and the composite sloop Changqing. Unfortunately, Courbet's squadron had been reinforced significantly since the start of the war, allowing him to take part of his squadron from Keelung to head off the attempt. And on the 11th of February, Courbet's task force met the Chinese fleet near Shipu Bay. On seeing the French fleet, the Chinese scattered. The 3 cruisers were able to get away, but the French trapped Yuyan and Changqing in Shipu Bay. On the night of the 14th of February, the French attacked with 2 torpedo boats in what would become known as the Battle of Shipu. The relatively brief engagement resulted in Yuyan being seriously damaged by spar torpedoes, while Changqing was hit by Yuan's fire in the confusion. Now, when I say spar torpedoes, the word torpedo at that time was a general word for a maritime explosive and would cover things like mines and things like that. And a spar torpedo was more like a limpet mine. You would basically close in by a small boat and use a long spar with an explosive attached to the end of it. You jam that explosive into the hull, activate the fuse and get out of there. It's as dangerous as it sounds, and the Chinese saw them coming at the last minute and opened fire, so they had to approach the ship while being fired upon as well. But they did manage to do that, and as I said, the Yuan was seriously damaged by those spar torpedoes, and in the confusion it fired on Changqing and caused damage to it as well. And so both ships were doomed to be lost, and the Chinese crews subsequently scuttled both of the ships to prevent the French from taking them as prizes. The French torpedo boats returned to their fleet with only minor damage. Well, having disposed of these minor vessels, Courbet pursued the cruisers and located Kaiji, Nanchen and Nenrui on the 1st of March 1885 in Zhanghai Bay near the port of Ningbo, where they had taken refuge with 4 other Chinese warships. Courbet tested the port's defences, but considered discretion the better part of valour, and simply guarded the entrance to the bay and bottled up the enemy vessels for the duration of the hostilities. The land battle in North Tonkin followed a similar path, with the Chinese driven out in the spring of 1885. Meanwhile, back in France, things did not go so well for the government, and it fell to a vote of no confidence over the way the war was waged and how long it took. So ends the Sino-French War. It was a strange occurrence. On the one hand, the French had been helping both the Vietnamese and Chinese governments to modernise and maintain security with the hope of opening up profitable trade between the countries, and initially only moved with force when French traders were being attacked. On the other hand, both China and Vietnam resented the amount of help, in inverted commas, that they were getting from the French and understandably pushed back. But they were no match for the heavily industrialised Europeans. Well, 150 years later, the consequences are that there are many excellent Vietnamese patisseries in Sydney, Australia. Thank you for joining me for another tale from longitude 150 degrees east.